Ashamed of her freckles, she kept out of the Duke's sight, unaware he longed to make her his bride. The ballroom of Lawnfield House blazed with gaslight, a cathedral of cream and gold where the season's most eligible maidens stood arrayed like costly ornaments. Yet in the corner shadow of the grand staircase, where the light fell softest and most forgiving, Leora Feneley kept her vigil of invisibility. She had perfected the art of being unseen. Her sage-colored gown, deliberately chosen to blend with damask wall panels, helped considerably. Her posture, slightly recessed, shoulders drawn inward, rendered her a cipher among the glittering assembly. Most crucially, she never raised her face toward the chandeliers. The gas flames, those merciless revealers, made her sardine-dusted cheeks burn with a shame that no amount of powder could conceal. "Leora, do come forward," urged Mirabelle Stratham, her childhood friend, touching her elbow with gentle insistence. "The Duke has asked for fresh introductions to—" "No." The word came out smaller than Leora intended. "I am quite content here." Mirabelle sighed, a sound half exasperated, half tender. "Contentment born of fear is merely another species of prison, my dear." It was the sort of thing Mirabelle said, observations that cut too close to truth. But Leora had long ago made her peace with the bars of her own making. At 23, she had resigned herself to the periphery of society, where women with unremarkable faces and uncertain prospects belonged. Her father, the relochronologist of considerable local reputation, had taught her to value precision and punctuality, yet he had never taught her how to bear being scrutinized under light. The murmur of the crowd shifted. Fans stilled. Even the orchestra seemed to hold its breath. The Duke of Lawnfield had entered the ballroom. Leora knew this not by seeing him, she dared not look, but by the visceral change in the air itself. It was as though a door to another world had opened, one where standards existed beyond the comfortable mediocrity of provincial society. The whispers began their familiar refrain. His Grace, unmarried still, the prize of 3 counties. Women who moments before had stood in measured clusters suddenly arranged themselves with careful nonchalance, as though they had not been waiting for precisely this moment. Leora remained perfectly still, her fingers worrying the small silver timepiece she kept hidden in her reticule. Her father's watch stopped at the hour of her greatest humiliation. She had been 17 when young Lord Ashbury had led her into garden light, laughed at her freckles and said, "How fortunate the shadows suit you better than the sun." Since that afternoon, she had chosen the shadows with deliberate certainty. "Miss Feneley," a voice low and measured addressed her directly. Her breath caught. Surely he did not mean, "I wonder if you might permit me a moment of conversation. Away from the gaiety, perhaps. The library is quieter, I am told." It was the Duke. The Duke was speaking to her. To her. Leora's eyes flew upward, and she found herself looking directly into a face of uncommon gravity. His features were not conventionally handsome. There was too much intelligence in his brow, too much melancholy in his eyes, but there was an undeniable magnetism in his stillness, as though all the noise of the world had been ordered to cease at his approach. "Your Grace," she managed, curtsying with more haste than grace. I am not accustomed to being noticed." His mouth lifted at one corner, not quite a smile. "I have observed you for some months now, Miss Feneley. I find your discretion far more intriguing than the performed vivacity of ladies who believe themselves to be observed only when they are loud." The words should have comforted her. Instead, they terrified her. To be observed was to be judged. To be judged was to be found wanting. "I fear you have mistaken quiet for virtue, sir," she said quietly. "I am simply unused to drawing attention." "Perhaps," he said, "attention has simply been foolish enough to look elsewhere." He extended his hand, not toward the dance floor, a mercy, but toward the corridor that led to the library. His expression was patient, as though he had all the time in the world, and none of it mattered except this moment. Leora glanced at Mirabelle, who was watching with wide, encouraging eyes. Then she looked back at the Duke's extended hand, at the family signet ring that caught the gaslight, at the offer implicit in that simple gesture. She did not take it. "Forgive me, Your Grace," she whispered. "I find I am fatigued. I believe I shall retire for the evening." Before he could respond, before mercy could undo her resolve, Leora turned and made her way toward the exit, keeping her face downward, her cheeks burning hotter than any gaslight could make them. Behind her she heard the whispers resume, but different now, curious, questioning, as though the assembly had witnessed something they did not quite understand. She did not see the Duke's expression as she departed, the way his hand remained suspended in the air for a long moment after she had refused it. nor did she see him turn to gaze at the corner she had occupied, as though the shadow itself had become somehow luminous. The morning after the ball, Leora sat in her father's study, threading silk through delicate linen under lamplight. The work was meditative, precise, qualities her father valued and which she had inherited in full measure. Outside, autumn rain fell against the diamond-paned windows in patient rhythmic intervals, and the world felt safely contained within these four walls. Leora. Her father, Mr. Edmund Feneley, entered carrying his leather ledger, his grey whispered beard catching the lamplight. "I have just received a call from the vicar. Apparently you fled the Duke's ball rather dramatically last evening." Heat crept up her neck. "I was simply tired, father." The vicar also mentioned that the Duke of Lawnfield himself inquired as to your well-being this morning. He came to the parish personally. Edmund set down his ledger with deliberate care. "That is not the behaviour of a man indifferent to a woman's sudden departure. Your Grace was being polite, nothing more." Leora's needle moved with increased urgency through the silk. "Surely a gentleman of his station makes such courtesies to all ladies of respectability." "Does he?" Edmund moved to the window, his reflection ghostly in the wet glass. "I have lived in this county for 24 years, my daughter. I have never heard of Dorian Valahurst paying such particular attention to anyone. The man is famously solitary. He reads philosophy, writes poetry in his own hand, and has rejected 3 countesses and an earl's daughter without apparent regret." Leora set down her needlework. "Then perhaps he was simply intrigued by my refusal. Men of title are accustomed to immediate acquiescence. Novelty, even when born of mere social awkwardness, might have amused him." "Or see," Edmund said, turning to face her fully. "He saw something in you that warranted his interest, and you, through some combination of fear and misguided humility, refused to allow yourself to be seen." The words struck Leora with force. It was the same accusation Mirabelle had made, clothed now in her father's steadier, more penetrating tone. "I am marked by my nature, father," she said quietly. "These freckles, this tendency toward shadow, this inability to inhabit a room with ease, these are not things His Grace can overlook merely because he has convinced himself to look kindly. Your freckles," Edmund said with sudden vehemence, "are the precise colour of autumn light on stone. They are marks of the sun's favour, not its judgment, and your tendency toward shadow, as you call it, is merely the natural grace of a woman who has learned to listen rather than perform. These are not liabilities, Leora. They are the very qualities that mark a soul worth knowing." He moved to her chair and placed a weathered hand upon her shoulder. "I will not force you into any man's company, but I would urge you to consider whether your shame is truly your own, or whether it is a garment you have agreed to wear at the behest of a world that has never earned the right to dress you in it." That evening, as dusk gathered in shades of pearl and slate, a letter arrived. It was sealed with wax, the imprint bearing the Lawnfield crest, a veil beneath an open sky. Leora recognized the handwriting immediately, though she had never seen it before. It possessed the same measured grace as the man himself, each letter formed with deliberate care. "Dear Miss Feneley, I venture to hope that your sudden departure last evening was prompted by circumstance rather than displeasure. I confess I am not adept at the conventions by which society regulates such matters. My mother, God rest her, attempted to educate me in the niceties of ballroom discourse, but I fear her efforts were largely unsuccessful. I remain by temperament and habit a creature of quieter spaces. There is a library in my estate, a room far less overwhelming than any ballroom. Should you find yourself inclined toward company that does not require you to perform brightness, I would consider it the greatest honor to welcome you there. We might discuss books or silence, or whatever subject your inclination favors. I remain, Miss Feneley, quite genuinely yours, Dorian Valahurst, Duke of Lawnfield." Leora read the letter 3 times, her heart moving through several conflicting rhythms. He had written to her. The Duke himself had taken pen in hand and written to her. More bewildering still, he had acknowledged the very fear that rendered her invisible, the assumption that she must perform brightness. She placed the letter on the escritoire, then retrieved it, then set it down again. Her hand trembled as she reached for her own writing materials. She would refuse, of course. She must refuse. To accept would be to invite scrutiny, gossip, inevitable disappointment when he discovered that her inherent nature was not charming shyness, but rather genuine insufficiency of presence. Yet even as her mind constructed these rational arguments, her heart, that treacherous organ, was composing a reply. The library of Lawnfield House was exactly as Leora's imagination had feared it would be, overwhelming in its beauty. Floor-to-ceiling shelves of walnut held volumes bound in leather, the color of port wine, forest green, and midnight blue. Afternoon light filtered through tall windows in precise geometric patterns, illuminating dust motes that drifted like small celestial bodies through the hushed air. The Duke stood near the fireplace, a slim volume in his hands, and he did not turn immediately when she entered. It was only when the servant had withdrawn and the door had closed with a soft click that Dorian raised his eyes to hers. "You came," he said simply. "I did not intend to," Leora replied, her voice betraying her with its slight tremor. "I read your letter perhaps a dozen times, each reading more firmly, resolving not to respond. And yet here I am, having written a response I thought I would never post." A smile crossed his face. Genuine, not the performed courtesy she had come to expect from the gentry. "I am grateful for your inconsistency, Miss Feneley. It suggests that beneath your admirable self-discipline, there exists some portion of you that has not entirely surrendered to caution." He set his book upon a side table and gestured toward the sofa near the window. "I have taken the liberty of having tea prepared. I hope you do not mind. I find that conversation conducted over some occupation, for the hands feels less fraught with the pressure of constant eye contact." Leora settled onto the sofa, and he sat at a careful distance, not so close as to presume intimacy, but near enough that their voices need not carry far. As he poured tea with evident concentration, she studied his face. In daylight, the melancholy she had perceived was more evident, but so too was something else, a kind of gentleness that seemed to emanate from his very bones. "Your letter was kind," she said, accepting the teacup he offered. "Though I confess it was also somewhat manipulative. You anticipated my every objection." "Did I?" His eyes held a glimmer of amusement. "Then perhaps you are not as inscrutable as you believe yourself to be, Miss Feneley. Or perhaps I have simply spent sufficient time observing you to have acquired some small facility in reading your thoughts." "You have observed me?" The question emerged with more alarm than she intended. "Since the midsummer assembly at the Duchess of Hartwell's estate, you stood in the conservatory, reading a volume of poetry while everyone else attended to the performance. I watched you for nearly an hour. You turned the pages slowly, and your lips moved slightly as you read, as though you were speaking the words aloud in some private ceremony. It was the most beautiful thing I have witnessed in 3 years." Leora's teacup stilled halfway to her lips. "Your Grace, that is, I scarcely know how to respond to such a statement." "Then do not respond," Dorian said quietly. "Merely hear it. I have spent the entirety of my life in spaces where women are presented as ornaments to be assessed and acquired. You are the first I have encountered who seems genuinely indifferent to such assessment. Your indifference is not coldness, it is integrity. It is the rarest form of beauty, and I will not permit you to diminish it by denying its existence." He set down his own cup with careful precision. "I suspect that at some point in your youth, someone told you that your face was insufficient, that the marks upon your skin were flaws rather than distinctions, and I suspect that you have spent the years since that pronouncement proving them right by hiding. But I am telling you now, with whatever authority my years and position might lend me, they were wrong. You are profoundly, achingly, indefensibly beautiful, not despite your freckles, but because of them, because they mark you as someone whom the sun itself has chosen to touch." Leora's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. No one had ever spoken to her thus, not with such directness, such utter absence of flattery. It was not the honeyed language of seduction. It was something far more dangerous. It was the language of truth. "I do not know how to receive such words," she whispered. "You receive them as I intend them, not as supplication but as testimony. I am bearing witness to what I have observed in you, Miss Feneley. I am reading back to you what you have been too afraid to read to yourself." He rose and moved to the window, and after a moment she joined him there. Outside, the gardens of Lawnfield were dissolving into autumn's muted palette, golds and umbers, and the fading green of things still living. "When I was a boy," Dorian said, his voice carrying the cadence of confession, "my father told me that men of rank were obliged to marry well, to secure bloodlines and holdings, to produce heirs and maintain power. He spoke of marriage as one might speak of a business contract. And for many years I believed him. I collected invitations, attended balls, regarded eligible women as one might regard horses, assessing their value through their bloodline and presentation." He turned to face her. "And then I saw you in that conservatory, and I understood that my father had been teaching me a lie. That marriage, true marriage, is not a transaction. It is recognition. It is seeing another soul, and being seen by it in return. Leora could not speak. Her throat had closed with emotion so profound and unfamiliar that she feared any attempt at utterance would shatter her entirely. "I do not ask for your affection, Miss Feneley," Dorian continued, his voice steady and grave. "I ask only for your presence, for the opportunity to know you, to speak with you, to learn the contents of that extraordinary mind. If in time you find that you cannot bear my company, I will relinquish my hope without complaint. But I cannot relinquish the opportunity to try." Slowly, as though moving through water, Leora raised her hand. She did not offer it to him. She was not yet brave enough for that, but she placed it upon the cool glass of the window, and after a moment of perfect stillness, his hand rose to rest beside it, separated only by the thin barrier of pain. It was not a touch. But in that moment, standing before the grey autumn garden, with the library's peace surrounding them like a benediction, it felt to Leora like the most intimate moment of her life. 3 weeks passed in a succession of stolen hours. The library of Lawnfield House became a sanctuary, a place where the ordinary rules of society seemed suspended. Leora visited twice weekly, ostensibly to assist Mirabelle with charitable correspondence, a pretense so transparent that even her father had ceased to question it. The Duke received her always in the same manner, with formal courtesy that gradually dissolved into something far more intimate as conversation deepened. They discussed Wordsworth and Byron, debated the morality of the social contract, and spoke of their childhoods with the kind of honesty that required absolute trust. Dorian shared his small leather notebook, the one in which he inscribed fragments of poetry and observation, and Leora found herself woven throughout its pages in metaphor. Autumn light on stone, a soul learning to inhabit brightness, the grace of becoming visible. Yet the world beyond the library walls was growing restless. On a Tuesday afternoon, when grey rain hammered against the library windows, Mirabelle arrived with Leora as usual, but did not depart. Instead, she took a seat in the corner with her needlework, her presence a necessary chaperone that transformed the entire tenor of the room. The Duke acknowledged her with civility, but something had shifted irrevocably. "I have received a letter from my solicitor," Dorian said, his tone deliberately formal in light of Mirabelle's presence. "There is a matter of estate business that requires my attention in London. I shall be absent for a fortnight." Leora's hand stilled upon her teacup. A fortnight felt impossibly long. "The season there is quite sufficient to occupy a gentleman's time," Mirabelle offered meaningfully. "I am certain His Grace will find ample distraction." The implication was clear enough. The Duke might encounter far more suitable companions in London, women of rank, of fortune, of the kind of presence that did not require library shadows to flourish. "I find myself disinclined toward distraction," Dorian replied, his eyes never leaving Leora's face. "I have discovered something here of sufficient importance to render London's season quite inconsequential by comparison." Before Mirabelle could respond, the library door opened with unexpected force. A man entered, thin-faced, severe in manner, his expression one of barely contained displeasure. Leora recognized him vaguely as Edwin Rathmore, the Duke's estate administrator, a figure who had haunted the periphery of Lawnfield's household since time immemorial. "Your Grace," Rathmore said, his tone crisp as winter. "I beg your pardon for the intrusion, but there is a matter of considerable urgency requiring your immediate attention. The steward has discovered irregularities in the tenant accounts that demand your inspection." It was an obvious fabrication. Leora could see it in the careful construction of his expression, the way his eyes slid away from Dorian's face. "I am otherwise engaged," the Duke said quietly. "The matter can wait until evening." "I fear it cannot, sir," Rathmore pressed. "The situation is of such magnitude that delay risks catastrophic consequences to the estate. Surely Miss Feneley and her companion will excuse you." It was the way he spoke her name, with the faintest tinge of contempt, that betrayed his knowledge of her identity. He had been aware all along. He knew. Dorian rose with visible reluctance. "Miss Feneley, I regret this interruption. Miss Stratham." He turned toward the door, but not before his gaze met Leora's for one long waited moment. When he had departed, the library seemed to contract around them. Mirabelle set down her needlework with deliberate care. "That man is trouble," she said quietly. "I have heard whispers at the market. Rathmore has been cultivating the opinion that His Grace's attention has been misdirected toward unsuitable company." "Unsuitable?" Leora's voice emerged hollow. "He has been suggesting to members of the local gentry that the Duke has developed a peculiar attachment to a young woman of questionable family standing. Not quite trade, he says, but not quite quality either. He implies that his grace is being manipulated by false modesty and calculated appeal to sentiment. Leora rose abruptly, moving to the window. The rain continued its relentless percussion against the glass, and she could see nothing of the garden beyond, only her own reflection, pale and ghost-like against the darkness. "He is protecting the Duke's interests as he perceives them," Mirabelle continued gently. "In his view, the son of a relochronologist, however respected, is wholly beneath the notice of a man of Dorian's rank. He believes he is saving his grace from a disastrous marriage." "I have never suggested any such thing," Leora whispered. "I have never sought—" "I know, my dear," Mirabelle said, rising to join her at the window. "But the world rarely concerns itself with what is true when a compelling narrative is available, and Rathmore is a man who understands the power of suggestion." That evening, Leora received a note. It was sealed with the familiar crest, and her hands trembled as she broke the wax. "My dearest Leora, forgive the formality of address. I am compelled by urgent matters to depart for London this evening rather than next week. Rathmore's summons was pretense, a point I suspect you have already divined. He has informed me that he intends to present certain concerns to my solicitors regarding my conduct and judgment. I have spent the afternoon considering what I must say to you, and I find that language proves inadequate. All the words I possess seem too small for the magnitude of what I feel. I will say only this. I do not care what the world whispers. I do not care what my solicitors advise or what society dictates. You have become essential to me, as essential as breath, as necessary as light. When I return, I intend to speak to your father. I intend to do everything within my power and station to make you my wife, should you consent. I know this is rapid, perhaps foolish, but I have learned that caution is merely fear, masquerading as prudence. Wait for me, Leora. Promise me that you will not retreat into shadow during my absence. I have seen you step toward light, and I cannot bear to think of you hiding again. All my devotion." Dorian Leora read the letter until the words blurred into meaninglessness. A proposal. He intended to propose. The impossible had suddenly become not merely possible but imminent. Yet even as joy surged through her, so too did a darker emotion. The certain knowledge that Rathmore would not surrender easily, and that the fortnight of Dorian's absence would be the perfect opportunity for him to poison the Duke's mind against her entirely. The fortnight proved to be the longest of Leora's life. Days stretched into attenuated versions of themselves, marked only by the arrival or non-arrival of post from London. The Duke sent 3 letters, each more passionate than the last, each one a testament to the constancy of his feeling. Yet they arrived with decreasing frequency as the days progressed, and Leora could not silence the voice in her mind that whispered of influence and persuasion, of solicitors and family counsel working to convince him of his folly. Mirabelle remained steadfast in her support, but even she could not entirely conceal her concern. "His Grace is a man of conviction," she said, though her tone suggested she was attempting to convince herself as much as Leora. "He will not be swayed by Rathmore's machinations." Yet society had taken notice. Where before Leora had been invisible, she was now the subject of pointed speculation. Invitations to social gatherings began to arrive with subtle redirections. "Regret to inform you that the company is quite full," or "the gathering has been postponed indefinitely." Women who had formerly nodded in greeting now turned away when she entered a room. Her father, returning from the market one afternoon, reported that several of the tradespeople had grown noticeably cool. "It is as though you have become contagious," Edmund said, though without anger, "as though association with the Duke's evident regard has somehow marked you as dangerous." It was on the 11th day of his absence that the devastating blow arrived. The letter came not to Leora directly, but was delivered to her father, wrapped in the seal of the Duke's London solicitors. Edmund called her into his study, his expression grave, and handed it to her, without comment. With trembling fingers, Leora broke the seal and read. The letter informed her, in the coldest legal terminology, that the Duke of Lawnfield had been advised by his counsel that any union between himself and Miss Leora Feneley would be inadvisable and potentially damaging to the standing and financial interests of the Lawnfield estate. It expressed regret that His Grace's temporary attachment had caused her distress, but noted that distance and reflection had restored proper perspective and judgment. It concluded by suggesting that Miss Feneley accept the situation with grace and dignity, and that any further contact between the parties would be discouraged by legal means if necessary. It was not from Dorian. It was not in his handwriting. It was worse than any personal rejection could have been, because it suggested not that he had changed his mind, but that he had been convinced to betray it entirely. Leora sank into the chair beside her father's desk, the letter falling from her hands. "My dear," Edmund said softly, moving to embrace her, "I am so very sorry." She did not weep. The shock was too profound for tears. Instead, she felt a vast numbness spreading through her, a glacial cold that seemed to freeze not merely her heart, but her very will to exist. "I will sue them if you wish it," her father continued. "There are grounds, I believe, for harassment, for—" "No," Leora said quietly. "No, father. If His Grace has determined that I am unsuitable, then I must accept his judgment as final. It was foolish of me to imagine otherwise. I was always invisible. Perhaps he was simply caught momentarily in a kind of delirium, a romantic notion that proved unsustainable when confronted with reality." "That is not true, and you know it," Edmund said with sudden vehemence. "I have watched that man look at you. His regard was real." Yet even as her father spoke, Leora found herself retreating into the familiar sanctuary of self-protective doubt. It was safer to assume that she had been foolish than to believe that she had been betrayed. It was easier to return to the shadows than to remain in the light and risk further humiliation. That evening she retrieved her small silver timepiece from her reticule and wound it carefully. The mechanism, long stilled, began to tick once more. Then, with deliberate ceremony, she stopped it again at the precise hour of her despair. Time, she thought, would resume only when hope returned. And hope, she had learned, was a luxury she could not afford. On the 12th day of his absence, as evening fell and rain began to gather in the trees like accumulated sorrow, Leora sat in the library corner of her father's study, not the Duke's library, but a smaller, humbler version. She had resumed her needlework, her fingers moving through the motions of a life that had contracted back to its former dimensions. Mirabelle found her there, breathless and dishevelled, her bonnet askew and rain dampening her cloak. "Leora," she gasped, "you must come at once. His Grace has returned. He has only just arrived at Lawnfield, and he is asking for you. There has been some dreadful misunderstanding about letters and solicitors, but he is determined to set things right. He is coming here to your home within the hour." Leora looked up from her needlework, her hands stilling. "He is coming here?" "Yes, yes. There is no time to waste. You must make yourself presentable and—" But Leora had already set down her work. She rose slowly, moving toward the mirror that hung above the mantelpiece. She looked at her reflection, the pale cheeks, the downcast eyes, the familiar posture of retreat. "I cannot see him," she said quietly. "It would be cruel. To hope again would be cruelty to myself. Leora, promise me, Mirabelle, promise me you will tell him I cannot receive him." The knock came precisely as Mirabelle had predicted, a formal, hesitant sound at the Feneley door, followed by the murmur of voices in the entry hall. Leora remained in the study, her door deliberately closed, her heart executing a frantic rhythm that made coherent thought impossible. She heard the drawing-room door open. She heard her father's voice, steady and welcoming. She heard a second voice, familiar, beloved, transformed by desperation into something rawer than she had ever heard it. "Where is she?" the Duke demanded. "I was told she was at home." "Your Grace," her father replied with courtesy that only barely masked his own tension. "Miss Leora has requested that she not be disturbed this evening. She is unwell." There was a pause, a terrible, weighted pause, filled with the sound of rain against the windows and the ticking of the hallway clock. "Mr. Feneley," Dorian said slowly, "I have received legal correspondence that I did not author. I have been informed by solicitors that I myself am guilty of writing sentiments I do not possess. I have been kept deliberately ignorant of my own correspondence while others have played puppet master with both our lives, and now I am told that the woman, whose name I have written 1,000 times upon my heart, wishes to be undisturbed." His voice rose, not in anger, but in a kind of anguished clarity. "I will not be disturbed from this conversation until I have seen her. I will not accept the intercession of solicitors or the convenient narratives of those who believe her beneath my station. I have written letters that have not reached her. She has received communications that do not carry my voice, and I will not leave this house until that deception has been laid bare before her eyes." Leora's breath caught. She moved toward the study door, then hesitated. What if he was here merely to perform duty? What if his words were gracious but his heart resigned? "Leora." The Duke's voice came through the study door itself. He had moved into the hallway and was addressing her through the wooden barrier. "If you can hear me, I am not here to release you from your promise. I am here to release myself from the chains that others have tried to place upon both of us. I am here to tell you before witnesses and before God that you are the only suitable companion for my life, that your freckles are marks of divinity, not imperfection, that your silence is not inadequacy, but eloquence, that I love you, not in spite of what you are, but because of it entirely." The study door opened before she realized she had moved. She stood framed in the doorway, and the Duke stood in the hall, rain-dampened and wild-eyed, his careful, aristocratic composure shattered entirely. "I do not care what the world says," he continued, stepping forward. "I do not care what my solicitors advise, or what society dictates, or what any man or woman believes I should want. I care only for you. I want you exactly as you are, frightened, scarred, glorious you. I want to marry you. I want to spend my life learning to read the language of your silences. I want to be the man whose presence permits you to exist in light, without shame." Leora could not speak. Her throat had closed entirely, and tears, the tears she had not shed in the aftermath of the solicitor's letter, began to stream down her face. "Say you will have me," Dorian whispered, stepping closer. "Say you will permit me to spend the remainder of my life in service to your happiness. I do not require your love, though I dare to hope for it. I require only your consent to build it together, day by day, moment by moment, in the light and in the shadow both." His hand extended toward her, the same gesture she had refused in the ballroom weeks before, but this time Leora did not retreat. This time she stepped forward and placed her hand in his, and the touch sent such a current of recognition through her entire body that she gasped aloud. "I love you," she said, her voice breaking over each word. "I have loved you since you stood in that ballroom and saw me when I was determined not to be seen, but I was afraid." "I know," he said gently, drawing her close. "Fear is the only force strong enough to make such a woman as you hide. But I am asking you now to be brave, to step into light, to become my wife and my heart and the very center of my existence." He took her small silver timepiece from her pocket, she had been holding it unconsciously, and studied its stopped face in the lamplight. "This timepiece," he said softly, "marks the hour of your greatest sorrow, but I am asking you to wind it now, not for me, though I confess I am selfish enough to wish it, but for yourself, for the woman who deserves to mark time, not by her humiliations, but by her joys." With trembling fingers, Leora reached out and turned the mechanism. The watch began to tick once more, and the sound seemed to fill the entire hallway with benediction. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will be your bride." And when he kissed her, gently, reverently, as though she were something infinitely precious and fragile, even the rain seemed to pause in its falling, as though the world itself was holding its breath at the moment when a woman learned at last that she was worthy of being seen. The announcement of the Duke's engagement to Miss Leora Feneley created a tremor throughout the county that rippled outward like a stone cast into still water. The society pages of the Provincial Gazette devoted 3 columns to the unexpected union, with the word unexpected serving as a veneer for the true sentiment, scandal. Yet scandal, Leora was discovering, transformed rapidly into irrelevance when confronted with the undeniable authority of a Duke's declaration. Within days of the formal announcement, the very women who had turned away from her in the market began to call upon her father's house, their expressions arranged in careful civility, their intentions transparently mercenary. They wished to be seen as supporters of the match, to position themselves as friends of the future Duchess. Leora received them with the same quiet courtesy she extended to everyone, which seemed only to increase their fascination. Mirabelle, attending her friend during these awkward visitations, whispered her amusement at the sudden reversal. "You were invisible before," Mirabelle observed as the third caller departed. "Now you are simply mysterious. They cannot decide whether to pity or envy you, so they have settled upon a combination of both." The preparations for the wedding proceeded with the elaborate machinery of aristocratic tradition. The Duke insisted that Leora be consulted upon every detail, from the flowers that would adorn the chapel to the guest list that would fill the pews. Yet there was one matter upon which Dorian remained immovable, the matter of Edwin Rathmore's position within his household. On an evening 2 weeks before the scheduled wedding, as Leora and the Duke walked through the gardens of Lornfield House, now her second home in all but official capacity, he raised the subject with visible reluctance. "Rathmore must be dismissed," he said simply. his hand warm within hers. "I have been reviewing the estate accounts and I have discovered a pattern of manipulation extending back several years. He has been redirecting funds, falsifying reports, and, perhaps most damnably, intercepting correspondence. It was he who fabricated the solicitor's letter, Leora. He forged my seal." Leora stopped walking, her hand tightening upon his arm. "But he has served your family for decades. Surely there is some explanation." "There is," Dorian agreed grimly. "He believed himself to be protecting my interests by preventing what he perceived as a disastrous marriage. He thought himself my savior, but in doing so, he committed fraud, forgery, and deliberate deception. The man I once trusted has revealed himself to be entirely unworthy of that trust." They walked in silence for a time, the autumn garden dissolving around them in shades of rust and gold. Finally, Dorian spoke again. "I have instructed my solicitors to offer him a choice. He may resign quietly with a pension sufficient to maintain him in modest comfort, or he may face prosecution for his crimes. I prefer mercy, if only because he was moved by a kind of devotion, however misguided. But I will not have him remain at Lawnfield, nor will I permit him to retain any authority over the estate or my affairs." "And if he refuses?" Leora asked quietly. "Then the law shall take its course," Dorian replied, his tone brooking no argument. "I have learned, my dearest, that mercy is not the same as enabling. To forgive a man is not the same as permitting him to continue causing harm." The following morning, Rathmore departed. His resignation letter, delivered to the Duke's solicitors, contained no explanation or apology. He simply vanished from Lawnfield, leaving behind only the residue of his deception and the sudden absence of his stern presence in the household's daily rhythm. Yet even in his absence, his influence lingered. There remained members of the local gentry who whispered their reservations about the match, who suggested that Leora had manipulated the Duke through calculated appeal to his romantic nature, who hinted at impropriety and design. It was Leora's father who addressed this most directly. 3 days before the wedding, he requested a private audience with the Duke in his study. Leora was not present, but Dorian reported the conversation to her afterward with evident admiration. "Your father," he said, settling beside her on the window seat in the library, "informed me that there would inevitably be voices suggesting that you had acted with calculation and cunning. He told me that such voices existed because society fears what it cannot control, and a woman who loves freely, without artifice, without the performance of flirtation, is precisely the sort of force that society wishes to diminish." He took her hand, his thumb tracing small circles upon her palm. "He asked me to promise that I would never permit doubt to enter my heart, no matter what whispers reached my ears. He said that your virtue lay not in your performance of virtue, but in your essential being, that you were incapable of dissimulation, because dissimulation requires a kind of self-consciousness you do not possess." Leora felt tears prick her eyes. "My father is wise beyond measure." "He is," Dorian agreed, "and he has given me the greatest gift a father can grant, permission to love his daughter without reserve." The evening before the wedding, Leora was unable to sleep. She rose from her bed in her childhood home, her last night before becoming Duchess, and made her way to her father's study. There, by candlelight, she found him waiting, as though he had anticipated her insomnia. "I am terrified," she admitted, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Tomorrow I become someone else entirely. I become a woman of rank and responsibility. What if I am inadequate to the role?" Edmund set down his pen and regarded her with the steady, penetrating gaze she had known her entire life. "You will be exactly adequate to it, my daughter, because you will approach it as you approach everything, with integrity, thoughtfulness, and genuine care for those within your sphere. Rank is merely circumstance. Character is permanence." He rose and moved around the desk, placing his weathered hand upon her head in a gesture of benediction. "And I will tell you something that you must know, Leora. That man loves you not because of what you appear to be, but because of what you are. He has seen through every defense you erected, every shadow you hid within, and he has chosen to love the woman beneath. That is not something you must earn. It is something you must simply allow yourself to receive." The wedding took place on an afternoon of crystalline autumn beauty, with sunlight streaming through the chapel windows in precise geometric patterns that seemed almost choreographed by Providence itself. Leora walked down the aisle on her father's arm, dressed in a gown of ivory silk that fell from her shoulders in gentle folds, her hair arranged with small roses the color of dawn. The chapel was filled to capacity. The entire county had come, driven by curiosity and the irresistible pull of witnessing an event that had transformed from scandal to spectacle. Yet as Leora's eyes found the dukes waiting at the altar, the presence of the crowd seemed to recede entirely. He wore formal morning dress with the Valorhurst crest upon his breast, and his expression held such undisguised devotion that several members of the congregation drew sharp breaths. This was not the expression of a man performing duty. This was the expression of a man who had found his entire world contained in the figure walking toward him. The vicar, an elderly man of considerable ecclesiastical authority, conducted the ceremony with appropriate solemnity. Yet even he seemed moved by the intensity of feeling that radiated from the couple before him. When he came to the vows, he paused briefly, as though to ensure that both parties understood the full weight of what they were undertaking. "I, Dorian James Valorhurst," the Duke said, his voice steady and clear, "do take thee, Leora Catherine Feneley, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part." But as he spoke the traditional words, his hand found hers, and he added in a voice meant for her alone, "And I vow that I will spend every day of my life ensuring that you understand the profundity of your own worth, that you will never again hide in shadow, that you will learn to believe that you are worthy of being seen, of being loved, of being cherished as the extraordinary woman you are." The vicar coughed discreetly, a sound that might have contained suppressed emotion or censure. It was difficult to say. Leora spoke her vows with a clarity that surprised even herself, her voice ringing through the chapel with newfound confidence. When the ring, a band of white gold set with a single emerald that matched her eyes, was placed upon her finger, she felt something shift fundamentally within her. The metal was cool against her skin, a physical manifestation of transformation. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer ashamed. She was no longer a woman hiding from light. As the Duke bent to kiss her, the entire congregation rose in applause, and even those who had whispered their reservations weeks before found themselves caught up in the genuine warmth of the moment. This was love made manifest. This was the triumph of seeing and being seen. The wedding breakfast that followed in the great hall of Lawnfield House extended long into the afternoon. Toasts were offered, speeches delivered, and Leora found herself navigating the complexities of her new role with a grace that seemed to surprise everyone, perhaps most of all herself. It was Edmund Feneley who offered the most poignant toast. Rising from his seat with evident emotion, he held his glass aloft and spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the hall. "I have been honored to be the father of Leora Feneley," he began. "Today I have the greater honor of witnessing her become the Duchess of Lawnfield, but I wish to speak not to her transformation, but to her constancy. She was never small, though she believed herself to be. She was never inadequate, though the world conspired to suggest it. She was always this remarkable woman. It took only the correct eyes to perceive her." He turned to face the Duke directly. "You have given her the gift that she deserves, Your Grace. You have given her the permission to become fully herself. I entrust her to your keeping, with the absolute certainty that you will guard her heart as carefully as she will guard yours." As the meal progressed and evening descended upon the house, Leora found herself watching the other guests with a kind of anthropological fascination. These were the people who had dismissed her, whispered about her, excluded her, and now they smiled and offered congratulations and presented themselves as witnesses to her elevation. Society, she was learning, was fundamentally mutable in its affections. Permanence lay only in the integrity of one's own heart. As night fell and the celebration continued in the ballroom, the Duke slipped a hand into hers and drew her gently from the festivities. "Come with me," he murmured. "There is something I wish to show you." He led her through the darkened corridors of Lawnfield House to a room she had never seen before, a small study lined with books, with a writing desk positioned before windows that overlooked the moonlit gardens. Upon the desk lay his leather notebook, open to a page filled with his careful handwriting. "Read," he urged, pressing it gently into her hands. Leora opened the volume and found page after page dedicated to her, in poetry, in prose fragments, in sketches that captured the precise angle of her profile, the curve of her cheek, the expression of her eyes as she read in the library. "Every entry is dated," Dorian said quietly, "beginning from that first day in the conservatory at the Duchess of Hartwell's estate. I have been writing you into existence since that moment, Leora. Not creating you. You have always existed, but bearing witness to you, recording your presence so that you could never again be invisible even to yourself. Leora's hands trembled as she turned through the pages. The final entry, dated that very morning, contained only a single line. "Today she becomes my wife, and I finally become a man worthy of her love." She closed the volume gently and turned to face him, her eyes shining with tears that this time came from pure joy rather than despair. "I love you," she whispered. "Not because you saved me or saw me first, but because in loving me you taught me how to love myself." And in the moonlit study of Lawnfield House, the Duke of Lawnfield held his new Duchess as though she might yet slip away into shadow, and promised that he would spend the rest of his life ensuring that she remained precisely where she deserved to be, held gently in light, loved completely, and forever, finally, entirely visible. The weeks following the wedding transformed Lawnfield House into something Leora had never imagined possible. Not merely a residence, but a home filled with purposeful warmth. The servants, noting the kindness with which their new Duchess treated them, began to move through the halls with less rigidity, more genuine grace. The gardens, under her gentle direction, were encouraged to express themselves with less formal precision and more natural beauty. Yet the true transformation occurred within Leora herself. A fortnight after the wedding, she ventured into the village without the armor of her former invisibility. She walked with her head held high, her freckles unobscured by shadow or strategic angling. The market vendors, recognizing her, greeted her with genuine warmth. Women who had cut her socially now sought her favor with transparent calculation, yet Leora found herself unbothered by their transparent motivations. She had learned that seeking approval from a world that had rejected her was a waste of the precious emotional currency she possessed. It was on such a morning, as Leora was selecting roses from a flower seller, that a carriage pulled to an abrupt halt near her. A woman of considerable age and evident aristocratic bearing descended, her expression one of stern scrutiny. "You are the new Duchess," the woman said without preamble. Leora recognized her immediately from portraits that hung in Lawnfield House, the Dowager Duchess, Dorian's mother, who had been traveling abroad since the announcement of the engagement. "I am," Leora replied calmly, curtsying with the precise degree of deference appropriate to her rank. "Welcome home, Your Grace. The Duke has been eagerly awaiting your return." The Dowager studied her with an intensity that made Leora grateful for the confidence she had cultivated. Then, unexpectedly, the older woman smiled, a transformation that softened her severe features entirely. "You are not what I expected," the Dowager said. "My son's solicitors painted a picture of a girl of questionable family, desperately manipulating my son through romantic artifice. Yet I perceive something entirely different. I perceive a woman of genuine character, standing in daylight without apology." "I stand in daylight, Your Grace," Leora replied carefully, "because my husband taught me that I deserved to do so. Before his intervention, I hid deliberately and thoroughly." "Then he married you precisely as he should have," the Dowager said approvingly. "Not because you were already accomplished, but because he perceived your potential. Very well. We shall get along admirably, I believe." That evening, as Leora and Dorian dined with the Dowager Duchess in the formal dining hall, the older woman regaled them with stories of her own youthful rebellion against aristocratic expectations. It emerged that she herself had been considered somewhat unsuitable, the daughter of a merchant, elevated through strategic marriage yet possessing sufficient character to command respect regardless of her origins. "Your father," the Dowager said to Dorian, "was determined to forge a dynasty built upon bloodlines and land. He could not comprehend that the strongest dynasties are built upon love and integrity. You have made me proud, my son, by choosing a woman of character over a woman of connections." After the Dowager retired for the evening, Dorian and Leora walked through the moonlit corridors toward their private chambers. The Duke held her hand with the gentle possession he had never relinquished since the morning he had arrived at her father's door. "Your mother approves," Leora observed. "Of course she does," Dorian replied. "She recognized in you what she recognized in herself, a woman determined to transcend the limitations others would place upon her. Your freckles, my dearest, are not marks of inadequacy. They are marks of distinction. They mark you as someone whom the sun itself chose to illuminate." They arrived at the threshold of their chambers, and Dorian paused, drawing her close. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. Within lay a necklace, delicate strands of silver arranged in the pattern of scattered stars, with a tiny emerald suspended at the center, directly above where her heart would lie. "It is modeled after your freckles," he explained. fastening the clasp gently at her throat. Each star represents one, mapped precisely from the night sky above Lawnfield on the evening you first permitted me to see you fully in lamplight. Leora reached up to touch the pendant, tears of overwhelming emotion threatening once more. It is beautiful. You are beautiful, he corrected, drawing her into the bedchamber. This is merely a reflection of what I perceive every time I look upon you. As the night deepened and the house fell silent around them, Leora lay in her husband's arms and reflected upon the extraordinary journey that had brought her from hiding to this moment of complete, unguarded happiness. She thought of the girl who had believed her freckles were shameful, her quietness a liability, her invisibility a mercy. That girl seemed impossibly distant now, preserved in memory like a figure in a faded photograph. She was no longer that girl. She was the Duchess of Lawnfield, beloved beyond measure, visible and radiant and entirely gloriously herself, and more significantly than any title or rank, she was a woman who had finally learned to see herself through the eyes of someone whose vision had never been clouded by the world's cruel and arbitrary judgments. The silver stars at her throat caught the moonlight streaming through the windows, and in their gentle gleaming, Leora Feneley, now Leora Valahurst, Duchess of Lawnfield, fell asleep with the certainty that she had come home not merely to a place, but to herself. 6 months had elapsed since the wedding, and spring had returned to Lawnfield with the kind of tentative beauty that suggested hope rather than certainty. The gardens, under Leora's patient cultivation, had begun to express a wilder elegance than they possessed under formal management. Roses bloomed in profusion without rigid geometric arrangement. Wildflowers were permitted to seed themselves among the cultivated beds. Nature, it seemed, thrived when permitted to follow its own inclinations, rather than being forced into predetermined patterns. It was in this garden, on a morning of particular warmth and clarity, that Mirabelle came to Leora with news that required sitting upon one of the stone benches that dotted the pathways. "Edwin Rathmore has been arrested," Mirabelle announced without preamble, settling beside her friend with evident distress. "He was discovered attempting to forge documents related to another estate, one belonging to a neighboring duke. It appears that his schemes extended far beyond Lawnfield." Leora received this information with a calm that would have been impossible for the frightened girl of months past. "Has His Grace been informed?" "Yes, and he has been called to testify. Apparently Rathmore's crimes are extensive enough to warrant criminal prosecution, rather than quiet dismissal. He faces considerable imprisonment, I should imagine." They sat in silence for a time, watching the bees navigate the profusion of flowers. Finally, Leora spoke. "I do not rejoice in his punishment," she said quietly. "His intentions, however misguided, emerged from a twisted sense of loyalty. But I am grateful that his ability to cause further harm has been curtailed. There is a difference between mercy and enabling, as my husband once told me. We can acknowledge the humanity of a person while still recognizing that their continued freedom would constitute a danger to others." That evening, when Dorian returned from the county town where he had provided his testimony, he found Leora in the library, their library as she now thought of it, reading by lamplight. She rose to greet him, and he pulled her close with the unself-conscious affection that had become the rhythm of their daily interaction. "Rathmore's trial will extend through the summer," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "But I have been assured that a conviction is virtually certain. His forging of my signature alone constitutes sufficient evidence for prosecution." "And do you feel vindicated?" Leora asked gently. "I feel relieved," Dorian corrected. "Vindication implies satisfaction in another's suffering, and I cannot quite achieve that state regarding a man who was for so many years a trusted member of my household. But I do feel satisfied that justice is being served, and that other potential victims will be spared his predations." He took her hand, turning it so that the afternoon light caught upon her wedding ring and the emerald pendant she wore constantly. "More importantly, I feel grateful. Grateful that his schemes ultimately led me to you rather than away from you. Grateful that his attempt to protect me from what he perceived as a disastrous union resulted in forcing me to choose consciously and deliberately what I would have chosen in any case." "Which was?" Leora asked, though she knew the answer. "You," he said simply, "always you. In every configuration of circumstance, in every possible arrangement of fate, I would choose you. Not despite your freckles, not despite your quiet nature, not despite your origins, but because of these things, because they are the essential components of your extraordinary character." Leora leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat together in the library as evening descended, surrounded by books and lamplight and the quiet certainty that they had found not merely love, but truth. As summer advanced and the days grew long and golden, Leora became increasingly aware of changes occurring within her own body. At first, she attributed them to the richness of her new life, the abundance of food and security that had previously been absent from her existence. Yet when certain unmistakable symptoms began to manifest, she recognized them for what they represented. She was with child. She had not yet informed Dorian when she attended a charity function in the village, an event organized by the ladies of the parish to raise funds for the local school. It was here, standing among the very women who had once shunned her, that Leora made a deliberate choice to reclaim narrative authority over her own story. During the gathering, as refreshments were being served, one of the more persistent gossips, a woman named Mrs. Weatherby, who had made a particular hobby of speculating regarding the Duke's marriage, ventured a pointed inquiry. "Your Grace," Mrs. Weatherby said with false sweetness, "you must tell us, how do you find married life? It must be quite an adjustment coming from such humble circumstances to the responsibilities of running a ducal household." The room fell silent. Every woman present understood that beneath the polite phrasing lay an insinuation, that Leora was inadequate to her position, that she had somehow deceived the Duke into an unsuitable match. Leora set down her teacup with deliberate care and rose to her feet. When she spoke, her voice carried with it all the quiet authority that comes from speaking absolute truth. "I find married life, Mrs. Weatherby, to be precisely what I hoped it would be. Not perfect, for perfection is a myth perpetuated by those who fear authenticity, but genuine. My husband loves me not because I have pretended to be someone I am not, but because he perceives who I genuinely am and finds value in that perception. As for my adjustment to this household, I have discovered that whether one emerges from merchant stock or aristocratic lineage, running a household efficiently requires only integrity, compassion, and genuine concern for those beneath one's authority. These qualities transcend class, and I believe my stewardship thus far has demonstrated that competence is not a birthright, but an achievement." She paused, allowing her gaze to move around the room, meeting the eyes of every woman present. "I will say something else," she continued. "I spent years believing that I was inadequate, that my appearance was shameful, that my quietness constituted a liability, that I did not deserve to be seen. And then I encountered a man who perceived not what the world suggested I should be, but what I actually am. That man chose to love me, not because he was deceived or manipulated, but because he recognized genuine value where the world saw only insufficiency. I thank God daily for granting me such perception, and I thank my husband for having the courage to defy social expectation in order to honor his own judgment." The room remained absolutely silent. Then, unexpectedly, the Dowager Duchess, who had been present at the gathering and was seated in a position of honor, began to applaud. The other women, not wishing to appear less supportive than the Dowager, joined in, their applause building into something that resembled genuine appreciation. Mrs. Weatherby's face had taken on a mottled appearance, and she excused herself shortly thereafter with the excuse of a sudden headache. That evening, Leora revealed her pregnancy to Dorian in the private study they had begun to share. His reaction was one of such profound joy that it seemed to illuminate the entire room. "A child," he said, wonder evident in every word. "Our child. Leora, do you understand what this means? We will create together a human being who will inherit not merely titles and lands, but the love that exists between us. A child born of genuine affection rather than strategic alliance." He placed his hand gently upon her still flat abdomen, as though he might feel the stirring of new life already taking root. "Will you permit me to say something that I have not yet articulated, though I have felt it since the moment I first saw you in that conservatory?" "Of course," Leora replied. "You are not simply my wife," he said quietly. "You are my salvation. Before you, I inhabited a world of hollow duty and performed feeling. You have taught me what it means to love genuinely, to see another person completely, to build a life based not upon expectation but upon truth. Every day with you is a day of redemption." Leora felt tears begin to stream down her face. Not tears of sorrow, but of the overwhelming emotion that comes from being truly, deeply, permanently loved. "And you," she replied, "have taught me that I was always worthy of being seen, that my freckles are not marks of shame, but marks of distinction." That a quiet heart is not an inadequate heart, but a contemplative one. That invisible need not mean valueless. You have given me the greatest gift, the permission to be entirely myself. 1 year had passed since the wedding, and Lawnfield House stood adorned in the pale beauty of early spring. The gardens, having survived the winter intact, were beginning their annual resurrection, snowdrops giving way to crocuses, the first brave shoots of hyacinth piercing the still cold soil. And within the nursery at the eastern wing of the house, a child slept in the afternoon light. Sophia Eleanor Vallerhurst, Duchess-in-waiting, daughter of the Duke of Lawnfield, and the former Miss Leora Feneley. She was 3 months old, and already possessed her mother's eye colour and her father's solemn brow. She had been born on a morning of extraordinary light, as though the sun itself had paused to witness her entrance into the world. The delivery had been difficult, requiring the attendance of 2 physicians and the steady presence of Mirabelle, who had refused to leave Leora's side throughout the ordeal. But the moment the child had been placed into Leora's arms, tiny, perfect, utterly dependent, all previous suffering had been transformed into something approaching divine gratitude. This small human being was proof of the extraordinary transformation that had occurred within Leora's life. She was the visible manifestation of love made flesh. Dorian had wept when he first held his daughter. Leora had never seen him weep before, and the sight of this composed, articulate man, undone by the presence of his child, had crystallized something fundamental in her understanding of what marriage could be. It was not merely romantic passion or physical attraction, it was the creation of a shared future, the building of a legacy based upon love rather than duty. The Dowager Duchess, upon seeing her granddaughter for the first time, had declared herself entirely satisfied with the outcome of her son's marriage. She had taken up residence at Lawnfield for the duration of Leora's confinement and had proven herself an unexpectedly tender grandmother, offering practical assistance and genuine affection in equal measure. "You have done well," she had told Leora, holding little Sophia with obvious delight. "You have given my son a life. Not merely a child, a life. There is a profound difference between the two." Now as Leora sat in the library, their beloved library, scene of so many crucial conversations, she gazed out upon the spring garden and reflected upon the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had been transformed utterly, yet remained fundamentally herself. She still preferred quiet to chatter, light to shadow, though no longer from shame but from genuine preference. Her freckles remained undimmed and unobscured, marks of the sun's favour upon her skin. The small silver timepiece that her father had given her, the one that had marked the hour of her greatest despair, now sat upon the mantelpiece. But it no longer remained stopped. Instead, it kept perfect time, and Leora consulted it not with dread, but with the simple practical need to know the hour. Dorian entered the library as he so often did in these afternoon hours, moving with the quiet grace that seemed to characterize all his movements. He kissed her forehead and settled into the chair beside her, taking her hand, as he always did. "Sophia is sleeping peacefully," he reported. "The nurse reports that she has fed well and displays excellent spirits." "Like her father," Leora observed with gentle humour. "Like her mother," Dorian corrected. "She possesses your eyes, your composure, your fundamental integrity. I have no doubt that she will grow into a woman of remarkable character." They sat together in companionable silence, the kind of silence that only 2 people who have learned to truly know one another can share. Outside, the spring wind moved through the garden, carrying with it the scent of growing things, of renewal, of possibility. "I have been thinking," Dorian said slowly, "about the letters that Rathmore intercepted, the ones that did not reach you during my absence in London. I have kept them all untouched, as they were when I discovered them in his private correspondence. I wonder if you might like to read them now." Leora considered the question. The letters represented the worst moment of her marriage, the moment when she had believed that Dorian's love was conditional, that it could be revoked by the persuasions of others. To read those letters now would be to revisit that pain, even if only retrospectively. "I think," she said carefully, "that I would prefer not to. Not because I doubt the constancy of your feeling, but because I wish to leave that pain in the past where it belongs. You have demonstrated through every day of our marriage since my despair that your love is genuine and unconditional. That is sufficient evidence for me." Dorian smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face into something almost boyish in its relief and happiness. "You are wise beyond measure, my dearest. That is precisely what I had hoped you would say." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small object. It was Leora's father's timepiece. the one she had kept stopped at the hour of her humiliation, the one she had wound again the day Dorian came to her father's house to declare his devotion. "Your father gave this to me when I asked for your hand," Dorian explained. "He said that I should keep it as a reminder that there are moments when time itself seems to pause, when the world holds its breath, waiting for something momentous. He wished me never to forget that the moment when I chose to claim you as my bride was precisely such a moment." He opened the timepiece, and Leora saw that the mechanism had been carefully dismantled and reconstructed. Inscribed upon the interior of the casing in delicate script were words, "Time cannot measure love, but it can mark the moments when a soul learns to see itself as it truly is, beloved, precious, worthy of all light." "It is beautiful," Leora whispered. "You are beautiful," Dorian replied, and after a year of marriage the words had not diminished in their power. "And I am grateful every moment that I have been given the gift of seeing you, knowing you, and being permitted to love you for all the days that remain to us." From the nursery above, the distant sound of their daughter's waking cry reached their ears. Rather than summon the nurse, they rose together and made their way upstairs. And as Leora held her child and felt her husband's arm around her waist, she understood with absolute clarity that she was no longer the invisible woman who had hidden in shadows from fear of judgment. She was visible, she was seen, she was loved entirely and forever. And the greatest miracle of all was that she had finally learned to see herself as she had always been, sufficient, worthy, and luminously, irrevocably beautiful. In a world that so often measures worth by conformity to arbitrary standards, this tale asks us to consider a profound truth, that beauty is not an objective quality inscribed upon the body, but rather a resonance that occurs when a soul is truly seen and accepted for what it fundamentally is. Leora's journey was not one of external transformation. She did not alter her freckles, did not force herself into the mold of conventional femininity, did not perform brightness in order to be deemed worthy of love. Rather, her journey was one of internal revolution, the gradual, painful, glorious recognition that she had been taught shame by a world that had never earned the right to dress her in it. And Dorian's role was not to save her, as romantic convention might suggest. Rather, it was to bear witness, to say with the authority of genuine perception, "I see you, not what you appear to be, but what you actually are, and what you actually are is magnificent." In this recognition lies the deepest lesson of the story, that love, true love, is not about rescue or salvation. It is about witnessing. It is about choosing to perceive another person completely, their freckles and their silences, their quiet wisdom and their hard-won courage, and declaring that person worthy not because they have proven themselves through performance, but simply because they exist. How many of us are living as Leora lived, hidden, diminished, convinced of our own insufficiency by voices that spoke without authority and judgments that held no ultimate truth? How many of us are waiting for someone to bear witness to our actual selves, beneath the shame we have learned to wear? The true magic of this story is not that Dorian changed Leora. Rather, it is that Dorian perceived what was always there, a woman of extraordinary grace, quietly powerful, luminously worthy of love. And in being perceived, Leora found the courage to perceive herself with equal clarity. This, then, is the moral. We are not responsible for making ourselves worthy of being seen. We are only responsible for ceasing to hide. The rest, the acknowledgement, the recognition, the love, will follow naturally for those souls brave enough to step into light. For we are all, in the end, marked by the sun. And those marks are not evidence of our inadequacy. They are evidence that we have dared to exist in the light of day. Dear beloved listeners, if this tale of hidden beauty, genuine love, and the courage to be seen has touched your heart, we invite you to join our growing community of Victorian romance enthusiasts. Subscribe to our channel to ensure you never miss a new story, each one crafted with the same care and attention to emotional authenticity that you have experienced in Leora and Dorian's journey. But more than that, we invite you to comment below and share your own reflections. Have you, like Leora, ever hidden from the world because you believed yourself insufficient? Have you experienced the transformative power of being truly seen by another person? Your stories matter, your voice matters, and we would be deeply honored to hear how this tale resonates within your own heart. Whether you engage with us through comments, shares, or simply by returning to listen again, know that you are part of a community dedicated to the belief that love, true love, sees us completely and declares us worthy not for what we perform, but for what we essentially are. Thank you for allowing us to share this story with you. We look forward to continuing this journey together. On behalf of the entire Victorian Romance Audio Stories team, we extend our deepest gratitude to you for accompanying Leora and Dorian through their extraordinary journey. Your presence, your attention, and your willingness to engage with stories of authentic emotion and genuine love inspire us to continue creating narratives that celebrate the beauty of being truly seen. Thank you for being part of our community. Thank you for believing in the transformative power of love. And thank you for reminding us through your loyal viewership that stories of heart and truth still matter in this world. With profound appreciation, the Victorian Romance Audio Stories family.